Shadowversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and man, I have really been enjoying Elden Ring lately. I've sunk about 50 hours into the game, and there's no sign of me slowing down anytime soon. And in regards to games that I really enjoy, especially when they are inspired quite heavily on medieval history in regards to the setting, the armor and weapons, well, I like to have a look at how well and accurately they depict those weapons in terms of the design, but also how they are used. Now, in regards to Elden Ring specifically, I love the game, okay? There's so many points of praise just speaking generally about gameplay and everything. This isn't a review of the game overall. This is more its adaptive, quality of these things that are so related to my passions, but also this channel, weapons and armor and stuff. But if you'd like to hear my kind of broader thoughts of the game and overall, well, I will be doing a review on my other channel, Night's Watch. Here on Shadowversity are about medieval history and fantasy and all those good things, and that's what we'll be looking at, the weapons and armor. Now, if you're thinking that this is a bit of a pointless kind of endeavor, because it's clearly fantasy and there are obviously many over-the-top exaggerated weapons and stuff like that, well, hang on, it is still worth looking at it, because when we do, surprisingly, I know I have found when I've looked at this, there are some elements that they've done really well on where they have kind of hit it out of the park. There's one in particular animation that is near perfect in terms of how this weapon is used. And they also did a really good job of the design. Then there are some interesting little errors that they've also done in terms of classification terminology. And then also some weapons are depicted being used vastly different to how they would historically and just flat out incorrect. And it's really interesting just to explore it and look at what they did right, what they did wrong, because honestly, I would love it if video games got it all right, depicted, because Elden Ring, yes, it's fantasy, but they are absolutely drawing heavily from history in many of the weapons. All the base weapons and many of the weapons categories are very much historically inspired. Elden Ring should be given huge compliments and credit for the attention to detail and respect that they have honestly shown the historical basis that these weapons and armor are founded on. They are surprisingly accurate in design in many instances. I'll be able to show specifics when we dive into the video game of how they're depicted and also how they're used. And overall, yeah, really good compliments. And because they're so good, I want to give them credit for that, but also point out the places where there's been big errors and encourage even going further, getting it done as good as possible, because that not only increases immersion, even if you are not familiar with the medieval setting and how these weapons are used, what's interesting is the more accurately they are depicted in terms of how they look, but also how they are shown being used, even if you're unaware of this stuff, the more immersive it becomes, because you can compare what the accurate usage is versus the exaggerated, incorrect usage is, and the correct one always feels more real, more sophisticated, and it will increase immersion even with people who are unaware of it. That's why I want to push it and encourage it and do this analysis. So thank you for joining us, and let's dive in and look at all these weapons and armor, specifically. Before we dive into the detailed analysis and breakdown of the Elden Ring weapons and animations, there's something my character needs. She's feeling a little bit hungry, so let's go visit this vendor, see what food he has available. Vendor, I am famished. What type of food doth thou have available?
Well, you're in luck, Tarnished. I just got my delivery of HelloFresh.
Free food while I'm adventuring and it's delivered to me? Sir! Tell me more! All you have to do is go to HelloFresh.com and use code Shadowversity16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. HelloFresh is remarkably convenient. It's so easy, it gets delivered right to your door, and the meals are delicious and you have all this variety. HelloFresh also has heaps of fit and wholesome recipes so you can indulge in delicious meals without any worries. There are so many recipes to choose from, they're all really delicious, and it really does help you break out of the recipe rut. I found this with myself. My family always ended up resorting to the same kind of go-to recipes again and again. Where HelloFresh opened up the variety in our diet and the nutrition, it was just just a really good choice for us, and I really feel it'll be a great choice for you. There's quick and easy recipes you can choose from, including 20-minute meals with easy cleanup and low prep options. And if you'd like a bit of a larger meal, you can increase the box serving so you can easily have leftovers for lunches as well. And because all their ingredients come pre-portioned, there's less prep time and less wasted food as well. The recipes are really easy to follow. You don't need to be a master chef to get some amazing meals that you end up making yourself. All you have to do is go to HelloFresh.com and use code SHADOVERSITY16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. I first tried out HelloFresh before they were ever a sponsor through a similar promo like this, and I've been hooked ever since. Up to 16 free meals right there. It's really great value and you won't regret it. So give it a try, and thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. To start us off, Elden Ring does a pretty surprising job of depicting the weapons, usually the starter weapons, quite accurate to the historical ones that they're trying to depict. But they do get some of the terminology wrong. For instance, the sword my character is holding right here is called the Bastard Sword, when this is just too big to be a Bastard Sword. This would be more accurately identified as a War Sword. Another interesting thing, this exact weapon that she is holding looks to be a copy of one that you can buy online, and that weapon that you can buy online is also incorrectly called a Bastard Sword, so that might be where they get some of the naming wrong. They've definitely been inspired or just straight up reproducing good quality weapons that you can find online, and the sword that this is based on is a decent quality one. I've actually seen and held it in real life, but it just goes to show you how you can get misled online when you take the information that you find just on face value. The other weapons that they have are done really, really well. For instance, the longsword, which is called a longsword, is pretty much perfect, right? It's a little on the small side, and so perhaps this would be better to be called a Bastard Sword. But overall, the game does a great job in depicting the historical weapons that they're based on, with just a few errors in its naming. So let's go through some of these weapons, shall we? We'll begin with, I guess, the smaller ones, and go through in order. The parrying dagger on profile looks great. It's a bit fat, but that's probably because of game design limitations to help you see it better, but very accurate to a historical parrying dagger. And in regards to its moveset, mostly fine. It focuses on the slashing types of attacks. There's a bit of an overswing. There's no real thrusts with it though, and so one of the big advantages with daggers is that you would often thrust with them, but in terms of gameplay design, it seems like they don't want to go too far with the versatility and the types of animations, so it gets predictable, you can telegraph, and it assists gameplay. Heavy attacks is just a kind of wide telegraph slash with more weight and power put behind it. In an actual combat situation, you would rarely want to telegraph this much, but this is mostly for a gameplay mechanic. The dual-wielding dagger animations focuses on slashing once again, very few thrusting, which is you're missing out on some of the most deadly kind of attacks that daggers can be employed in. But in regards to how these slashes look, they're very fast and it looks pretty cool overall. So now we come to the straight sword category of weapons in the game, and this is where I have some annoyance with just the categorization system, because it also affects how certain weapons are depicted and how they're animated. In the straight sword category, they lump in both short sword, arming sword, and long swords all together, giving them all the same animations, and this just isn't how these types of weapons operate. Their weights are quite considerably different, and you can do different things with them. Of course, shorter and arming sword weapons are much easier to use in one hand than long swords, and just the way that you're able to maneuver them is at a different speed. There's a different tempo at play. But if we have a look at the straight swords that I've found, you'll see both short sword, long sword. They call this the broadsword, but this is the arming sword, and there's another, type of long sword. And yet the animation for each one of these weapons are identical. And if you have a look at the weight that this character is throwing around into the strikes, one, it's very overswung, and if we're just going to be quickly critiquing the type of animation for this weapon, she's acting like this small sword is far heavier than what it really should be for its size or design. And then if we switch to what they call the broadsword, which is actually it's a really nicely designed arming sword, like it looks beautiful, but the animation is identical, and again, too much overswing, acting like the weapon is far heavier than what it really would be in reality. I acknowledge the gameplay mechanic of needing to telegraph, so, your opponents in PvP can see what's happening and have a chance to block and everything, but I do feel that there are ways that you can try and include subtle telegraphing without making it look unrealistic. From a martial arts perspective, very poor technique. Just watch carefully with the wind-up and the overswing in this strike. And most of the strikes with this weapon are overswung. Then you have the two-handed options for each one of these weapons, the long sword, the short sword, and even though they call it a broadsword, I'm calling this an arming sword because that is essentially what it is. And it's the exact same animations for them all, which just do not make sense for such a small sword like this. Look at how much it's swinging around, way too much weight in it. Same with the arming sword. And the long sword is the only one that you could mildly justify, but you would need a much bigger long sword than what these animations are really kind of showing. You could justify that she's just throwing all her strength into these types of strikes. I do like that there's a well-timed, executed and balanced step with each one of these strikes. Step forward, hit, step forward, hit, step forward, hit. They're just a bit too slow and cumbersome, and it makes it feel like the weapon would be much heavier than what it is, but this is nowhere near as egregious as some of the other weapons that we'll get to. But this is a very common thing that we see in a lot of video games, where the movements are exaggerated to convey both power and motion, where it's really easy to see to the person playing it. But I do feel we could achieve the same thing in terms of the gameplay purpose with more realistic and therefore immersive animations, because there is one weapon in which they do it surprisingly well, much better than I kind of expected. And let's take a look at that right now. It is the Uchi Katana, which is basically an O-Katana or no dashi or a large tashi. It is a large katana, essentially. A katana that's more suited for the battlefield. And I like that they've gone for that the standard katana is better suited as a backup weapon or one for self-defense. So points there. Now in regards to the animations, the one-handed animations kind of suffer from the same symptoms, not as much, but it's close, as the straight sword category, which, as we saw, includes arming sword length and long swords, and there's a decent amount of overswing in some of them, but still the stances are better, especially the ending stances ready for a follow-up strike, where it's there ready for a follow-up strike and again. And so already we see some better animations in regards to real effective swordsmanship, but the one where the animations just are basically perfect for this weapon are the two-handed animations. So this is going to show you that the devs of Elden Ring can just hit it out of the park. And it's interesting that the weapon that has near perfect animations is the Japanese weapon, and this is from a Japanese game development company, because they probably have more sources or are more familiar with how this weapon should look like from the media and the general educational sphere that they're exposed to. So let's have a look at these animations. Already, you can see them. They are much better in terms of where the attack ends. It's not too overswung and it's ready for a good follow-up strike. And one of the ending animations that I really like is the ending position of the second attack. So the first one ends. Now see that position right there. See the ending position of the second attack is beautiful. It's not overswung. It's held at the high, ready for a follow-up attack, which does really well. Oh, the ending position of the third attack is perfect as well. It's a very beautifully animated moveset. So if only we could have gotten such beautiful animations for all the historical based weapons. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making this video, to just kind of encourage, if the devs ever see this, they've done a really great job, but there's areas for improvement to just add more immersion. Now you might be thinking, how important is this? There's a lot of people that don't know what historical swordsmanship or historical martial arts, weapon based martial arts should look like. But even if you don't know it, you get a feeling, you can see the power and control and technique in an animation like this, as opposed to animations like this, where it's just more, looks like wild overswinging brute force, when, European swordsmanship has such specific and sophisticated technique. Movements convey what is going on in the character's or the combatant's head, how controlled they are, how well trained they are as well, and also the properties of the weapon, how heavy or how elegant it is. My criticisms of the animations just get worse when we get to the next category of weapon, the great swords, because if you think the straight swords were overswung, have a look at some of these animations for the great sword. Now, one-handed, I could kind of agree that it's very hard to one-hand a great sword, and you would have a lot of trouble swinging like, but even not as bad as this, especially with the sword that we're holding here, because this sword you can actually basically buy online. It's a real sword that is made online. That's what they've clearly based it off of. And you wouldn't need to overswing to this level. If you put heaps of strength into it, yeah, maybe you could push it to that. But this character is acting like it's far heavier than what it is. Now, when you apply 2 hands to this weapon, that's when it goes overboard, because 2 hands, you're essentially doubling the amount of, well, actually, you're not more than doubling the leverage you can apply to it, but you're doubling the amount of strength you can apply to move this weapon around, and it should not be as difficult as it is shown to attack with. Like, have a look at this. You're basic... It's like she can barely lift the thing. No, these animations are horrible for greatswords. This is just really, really bad, very unrealistic. This is one of the big fails in the game. Like I said, the game does a great job in some areas and an awful job in some areas. I do admit it does depend on the size of greatsword that you give the character, because there are multiple greatswords you can get in the game, yet each one of these, they're not over the top as far as you can get with those, the next category that we'll go to. But the Claymore, it's the same issue, because the exact same animations. Claymore looks a bit bigger, but it's when the 2-handed ones, it's like she can barely lift it. This is simply not how you fight with greatswords, and greatswords aren't as heavy as this. Granted, Claymores are on the heavier side on the greatsword category, even historically, okay? But overall, these are more elegant weapons. You can fight with them in a far more sophisticated way. You follow through with the momentum. So unfortunately, the greatsword is a pretty big fail in regards to its animations. Could be much, much better. But if you think the greatsword was bad, let's have a look at the next category, the Colossal sword. Now, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with this, except for the fact that they've included this weapon in the category, the Zweihander, which is definitely in the greatsword category, but they've included in the Colossal sword category, and as a result, they are showing the Zweihander unbelievably heavy. Like, truly, the Zweihander is a surprisingly elegant, thin weapon historically. There were heavier versions, but there were a lot of far thinner versions, and all the movesets that I was talking about, which should be more accurate to the greatsword category, apply to the Zweihander. But have a look at the animation that they're showing with the Zweihander here. It is like, she is acting like this is a near unmovable piece of steel, and the way that it just thuds the ground when she hits is so unrealistic to what this weapon is, that like the true weapon, the historical Zweihander. Oh my goodness, that's unbelievably incorrect. And this is the same when we go to the 2-handed animations. She can barely lift the thing. It is ridiculous. Now, I don't have too much of an issue with these animations when we get to truly ridiculously oversized and weighted weapons, like this kind of, guts inspired from the anime Berserk. Look how thick this thing is. I could believe that this thing would be as heavy as we kind of see in these animations here. And truly, yes, you would need absolute superhuman strength to be able to even lift this thing, let alone use it. But the fact that they show this sword, which is unbelievably heavy, to be equivalent to the Zweihander, oh, that's unforgivable. I can't stand it. At least they have a good thrust animation, but this hurts. This hurts my soul. The rapier's design is pretty much perfect. It looks absolutely accurate. It might be on the short side, though. Actual, historical rapiers could be a bit longer. Animations are mostly perfect, okay? Very thrust-oriented. We even have, the ending thrust has an interesting hand position, which we see in historical manuals as well, where she holds it kind of up. See that ending one? Where the fist is focused, held up. Really good. I really like that. Heavy attack, mostly good. Like, no real complaints there. The rapier isn't as light as people think. It's about as heavy as an arming sword. And so the weight that the character is kind of showing in terms of how heavy the weapon is, this is all working really well. So that was the thrusting sword category, and then I have another sword category called the heavy thrusting sword, which is mainly for the stock. I haven't found the stock, but I do have the heavy epi, I think this is called. Let me just quickly double check. The great epi, or epee. And they're showing that it's heavier. The animations work pretty good. Again, not too bad here. The heavy animation is a slash. You could get away with a slash, but actually, for like the stock category of sword, historically, most of them didn't even have an edge. They were a dedicated thrusting weapon, and so this would just be more like slapping him with a more blunted piece of steel. Not really sure on the heavy animation there. We go to the two-handed animations, focusing on the thrusts. Really good. Love it. The heavy attack, though, is again a two-handed slash. So, look, yes, you could have this if you had, like, a stock with a cutting edge, but most of them didn't. And so that animation just doesn't really fit. The scimitar's design is pretty good. Now, the term scimitar is a more umbrella term for a family of sword, like greatsword is an umbrella term for a family of larger swords. And so the sword we're actually holding here is more like a shamshir or killish, but looking mostly good. And I don't mind the animations, where focused slashing animations with wide or long lunges are really good, actually. I really like it. The animations kind of remind me of certain saber forms, and so, yeah, I really like it. And this is actually probably one of the better animations, where there's not huge overswing. In fact, the arm, well, the shoulder is always facing forward, and so it's only the arm that's actually swinging behind, but that's keeping everything mostly in position. Yeah, these animations are really, really nice. Two-handed animations are also pretty good. There is some overswinging, but I really like it. Now, what's interesting about this category of sword, this is in the curved category, this falchion is in the same category of sword, but actually has a different animation. Where the scimitar had more upward kind of slashes, the falchion has more downwards slashes, and I don't mind that. There is a bit more overswinging, it makes it look a bit more crude. But I do like the attention to detail that they decided to give a different animation to the falchion versus the scimitar. And because I haven't gotten all the weapons in the game, there's probably different animations for weapons within the same category as well as a result. The two-handed animations for the falchion, pretty good. I mean, there's some brutish overswinging on the second attack. Look at this one right there. That's a pretty brutish overswing there. Throwing too much weight, which you don't need massive amounts of force to do equivalent damage with swords, or definitely enough damage. In terms of the design of the falchion, I quite like it, you know. The charge swing, there's a spin in there, but it's alright. The look of the falchion, I quite like. That's a beautifully designed falchion as well. I'm going to give an honourable mention to the twin blade here, because I've actually done a video on double-bladed swords, and I actually feel the double-bladed sword has an appropriate place for fantasy. There is more utility to this weapon than what many people have said in the past, because this weapon has been given a lot of criticism as being utterly ridiculous. If you want to know the reasons why, check out my video. I don't like the one-handed animations. This would be a really awkward one-handed sword. You would never really want to one-hand it. But in terms of the two-handed animations, hitting with both ends, a spin, you could kind of get away with it. But look, it's a cool, flashy weapon. I explain in my video the best way that I feel you would want to fight with this weapon, and of course this isn't the same. If you want to see what that is like, once again, go check out that video. But it's a fun weapon. I like that they included it. So now let's have a look at the axe animations. Now, basic, axe, it's a bit on the large side for a one-handed battle axe of this type. This is very much kind of like Viking, Scandinavian-inspired battle axe. The axe head is very much on the thick side. In terms of the animations, what I find interesting is in some of them, there's not as much overswinging as the one-handed swords. I don't mind that it ends on a really heavy downwards cut. It's an axe, you could throw your weight into it. The heavy attack animations are, very overswung, lots of telegraphing, it conveys power, so it's the same kind of thing that we see with a lot of other ones. If we have a look at the two-handed versions of this weapon, look, less overswinging than even the longsword in some of this. I like that in some of these animations, it looks like she's using the momentum to continue the strikes, where she kind of swings with it. That's actually pretty good. In terms of the heavy attacks, same kind of thing. Not too much difference, even with a charge-up one. So, lots of telegraphing with that version. What's interesting is that there is a different animation between this axe and the larger ones. These ones are slightly slower. And is that to reflect because they are larger weapons? But compare that to this one. This one is slightly faster. Looks better, in my opinion, than the animations with these bigger ones. But these axes in real life, if they were actually real, would be so insanely heavy you would barely be able to lift them. So, two-handed swings, yeah, not great, but like I said, this weapon would be so heavy, it kind of suits. But then we get to the great axe, and look at the size of this thing, it's utterly ridiculous. Well, I get it, it's fantasy, it's for fun. I actually like the over-the-type, insanely big weapons in this game, because they look awesome, okay? But of course, we can acknowledge that you would not even be able to lift a weapon like this. In terms of the animations, yeah, this would be so insanely heavy, you wouldn't even be able to lift it, but even if you could, it would be something like that. I could be on board with these animations for one that is definitely this big. So now we come to the hammer category, which also includes one-handed warhammers and maces as well. So looking at the animations for this club, it's basically one animation, just hit. And look, I would like some more diversity in the animations. You could do some, you could follow through with the momentum to get a bit more diversity. Because stopping this momentum there to just pull back into another swing, it's a lot of wasted energy where you could just go with the momentum. Two-handed, same deal. Heavy attacks, big hit. Nothing really to praise there, it's just large telegraphing, but throwing all your power into it. Switching over to the mace, though, at least we have a bit of a better animation set, even though it's funny, like, when they have such vastly different animations, is there a point in keeping the weapons in the same category, like having that basic club in the same category as the other ones? And the category is hammer, and I mean, the mace is definitely not a hammer, but like I said, they get terminology muffled and mixed in this game. Now, in terms of the animation, lots of telegraphing, lots of overswing. Look, it's not great. It's more weight-based weapon, but still, don't like it. I don't mind the heavy animation, where instead of pulling all the way back, she kind of holds it up high for a big hit. Like, way too much telegraphing and overswinging with the two-handed ones. Don't mind the heavy attack, where instead of pulling it back, she more holds it up and then hits. That's not bad. And pretty much same animations for this war pick here, which is closer to historical Warhammer, actually. So yeah, it's basically the same, except with this heavy attack, she does pull the weapon all the way back. And if you're bracing ready for it, but there's still too much telegraphing. And then we have the flail, and I'm not a fan of the flail generally. Like, even running around like this would be hitting her side and stuff. But look, the actual design is pretty good. The chain isn't long enough to hit their knuckles, so that's good. Swinging, following through, you actually do need to follow through with the flail, so it doesn't actually hit you. But you can just see how that flail head is moving. It's not moving realistically. Sometimes it's just suddenly stopping too soon, and it's not swinging nearly as much as it would. Heavy attack, Look, I kind of like that there's a bit of a wind-up swing and then a big hit. That's not bad. Two-handed flail. Yeah, overswinging, telegraphing. And again, the weapon isn't as heavy as it's being depicted. I do like this swing wind-up, though. That looks cool. So let's have a look at the halberds in this. And the design? Yes, beautiful. Love it. But the fact that they have even the possibility of using it in one hand, or like, halberds are particularly top-heavy, and so the amount of strength you'd need to be able to just hold it up like that without a second point of leverage, it would kill your wrist. This is pretty much impossible, and even if you could pull it off, it'd be so difficult, you would not be able to put a lot of force behind it. Heavy attack, I kind of like this one. See the amount of bracing that she needs to do to even get the strike in? Because the halberd would be so top heavy, in reality, this one is more realistic than many of the other animations, because the halberd would be such a difficult weapon to use in one hand. But let's see if that carries through to the two-handed animations, where suddenly this should not be depicted so cumbersome and heavy, because it's a vast difference in the amount that you can move this weapon around when you have a second point of leverage, alright? And so now, looking at this, main one-handed attacks, they're not bad. And thrusts, you know, I like that they're showing it, halberd is, yes, a thrusting weapon, as well as a slashing one. And then we go to the heavy attacks. This is a bit harder to say, because it's not, I actually don't feel as they're showing it to be over heavy. I feel that they're showing her putting more strength into the strike. She's telegraphing too much, but the weapon doesn't look overly cumbersome. It's just that she's, you know, putting more effort into it. The thing that I don't like, necessarily the spins. This one isn't too, you could justify it, because you're putting so much weight and power into the strike that spinning to complete the next attack can you could argue it that you're not losing any more time and not putting yourself in any more danger, except for losing sight of the opponent. But I can, you know, give a certain allowance to spins when you're going with the momentum and you're not losing time. I don't like the slight pause, like right here, there's a pause. If you just continued it, and I think you do it here, that's much better. You could get away with something like that if the weight and power is just so great you can't stop. Instead of trying to stop the strike there and follow up with an attack from the other side, just going with it. Yes! And in fact, I like this charge up heavy attack with the halberd. I think it's awesome. Of course, it would have been even nicer to see more historically accurate halberd techniques, such as one of the more correct stances where you hold it with the butt of the halberd pointed towards your opponent, because some of them, especially poleaxes, had points on them. I really like the spears in this game, and in terms of the design, there's different types. They all look pretty good. The starting spear, which I don't have, basic spear, nothing wrong with it. I love that they have one spear that is essentially a sword staff, and this is, and you know, I've got a whole video on the sword staff. It's awesome that they appear in this game. And there's two types. There's a spear sword staff, and then there's a halberd sword staff as well. And so, of course, this one has the actually, this has a different animation compared to the other halberd as well. Upward slashing. Again, I like that they have different animations for different weapons, even of the same type. I think that's just cool. But going back to the spear, the animation's actually pretty basic with the spear. It's just thrust. This is it. This is the animations here. 3 thrust, too much wind up, too much overswing. You know, you could throw this much weight and power into thrusts. I don't think you need to telegraph this much, though. And then we have some, you know, these animations, again, there's a bit of a wind up, but you could put this much power into them, so they're not necessarily unrealistic. And some of the other spear types, like this, the partisan, it's mostly accurate to, you know, a historical partisan. It's not perfect, though, so some of the weapons were basically perfect replicas of their historical counterparts, where this partisan, no, it's not great, but it's okay. So the spears are pretty good overall, and look, they even have a pike. It would be hard to one-hand a pike like this, because they'd be so top-heavy. But, you know, Does the job. Now let's talk about the shields in the game, because I'm a little divided. In some ways they depict shields great, in other ways they depict shields terribly in terms of how they're used. Most of the actual designs of the shields look beautiful. There's a lot of different types of shields, and I love that they have so many kite shields, except that I'm still waiting to find a kite shield that blocks 100% physical damage, because, like, come on, we're, like, in terms of gameplay, just mechanics, I need a kite shield that can block 100% of physical damage, okay? I'm actually playing a shield meta at the moment, and I need a shield that blocks a lot, and so I've actually been using the tower shields, the big shields. But see, I'll probably be using... I love the design of this, big shield. It's technically a kite shield, but again, not 100% physical damage. What are you doing to me? But just separate to that mini rant, there's a couple of things that they do really good with it. For instance, the small shields, the bucklers, when you block, she actually holds it out pretty far. That's the way that you do want to block with a buckler. What I don't like then is the fact that she basically lowers it completely when she attacks. Like, she basically moves the buckler behind us. That's not... You don't want to... You have a shield for a reason. You keep the shield forward, especially with, buckler and sword fighting. You don't... It just basically forgets that the shield is there. Now, unfortunately, this is the case with most shields. When you're holding it out, basically forgets that they're holding a shield when they go to attack, and this is all shields, even the big tower shields. The character forgets that they're holding him and just goes to attack. This is a very common error that they have with shields. Shields, you hold them out, you can attack with a sword and many other weapons while still holding the shield out in front of you. You have a shield for a reason, use it. So, as I mentioned, they do this in nearly all video games. One of the areas that I really like, they didn't do it completely here in Elden Ring. There are some weapons that you can use that you hold the shield out and you keep it there when you attack. And so you keep the guard up when you attack with specifically thrusting focused weapons. The rapier, but my particular favorite, the shield and spear, and this is my current meta and loadout in my main playthrough at the moment. Heavy shield and big spear, basically playing as a phalanx soldier, and it's pretty awesome. Well, it's basic, it's just thrust with shield, but when you get the right Ash of War, where you can power up the shield and basically block everything, it works pretty well. In fact, it's a bit of a game-breaking combo. I've been just smashing so many bosses way too easily, far easier than it should be for a Souls-like game. But that's because you can cheese certain metas and just smash through it. I'm going to be doing other playthroughs where I'm not doing such a kind of, broken meta, but part of me kind of likes that the spear and shield combo is so OP, because guess what? Historically, it was OP, and so I'm okay with certain combos being OP if they have historical foundation and basis for it. Because what kind of annoys me in Elden Ring is that there is one, OI combo which is pretty powerful, and it's just not reflected in history, and it's how powerful they made the Uchi Katana compared to other one-handed and two-handed swords, because it scales a little bit better than, say, the longsword, yet it has an inherent blood loss mechanic, which just makes it unbalanced in comparison to the other sword. In reality, the katana of longsword length wasn't better than a longsword. They have strengths and weaknesses both in their own regard. And in terms of the mechanics of how they execute it in-game, they've made the Uchi Katana far stronger than what it is historically in comparison to other weapons that can achieve the same purpose. So in some ways I'm okay with OP combos, in other ways I'm not, when they're not reflected in history. But hey, phalanx, shield kind of formation, yeah, I like it. And so she lowers the shield in the heavy attack, and so I basically never use the heavy attack, and I just power up, and it's basic, but man is it effective. And at least, as I mentioned, they have a combo where finally you can keep the shield up while you attack, because that's what shields are meant to do. So There's a bit of a win there. We're almost done going through the historical weapons in Elden Ring. Now, I know there are more wacky, unique weapons that I could comment on, but I'm far from having all of them, or at least enough that you can get in the game that I could talk about. Hey, if you like this type of video, though, let me know in the comments, because when I get more in my playthrough, more of the wacky weapons, maybe I'll do a review of the wacky weapons in Elden Ring. But before we get there, definitely should talk about bows. I am an archer myself. I have a bit of experience in this regard, and so in terms of how they depicted the bows, well, it's not bad. I'm not a fan of the basic, animations, because look at how she's holding it, right? One, it's not a full draw. Two, you could never hold it a full draw infinitely like they're showing here. And three, I don't like the sense. It's all, if you were actually to draw a bow like this, you could do it with a light bow, and we see that in, Olympic archery. This is very much a kind of like Olympic archery form, but this isn't what combat archery would look like, especially if you're dealing with a war bow. She's not utilizing her back muscles or anything like that, and so I'm not a fan of just the standard archery kind of shooting, and this is the same with the longbow as well. She's leaning a bit further back with the longbow animation, but it's not great. One of the things that I am a fan of, though, and that is the heavy or special attack that you can get with some of these longbows. Now, in some of them, it's just like a quicker thing, but look at that. Look at the heavy attack. This one I actually really like. She is overdrawing it to a crazy degree, but I like that they're showing. See how she's leaning back with that draw in the bow, leaning all the way back and then just letting it rip. Aside from the length that she's overdrawing it, this is a far more authentic kind of stance and posture that you adopt when you shoot heavy war bows. The normal shots, the normal archery of these war bows in the game should look more like this, even with the regular shots, and then they could do something, then they could do, say, an overdraw animation for the super heavy, even though overdrawing it to this level, if the bow isn't made for it, you'd damage your bow. They wouldn't be able to maintain it heaps. So this type of animation, just drawing to the ear with a stance like that, there are multiple stances you could do for, warbow archery, and then the heavy shot, the special shot that takes mana, you could overdraw it to that extent, and maybe I'll still give it a pass. But I do like that the short bow has the same kind of overdraw. I don't like that they have the short bow doing inherently less damage than the long bow. Is there even a different category between, they have the light bow and regular bow, when if you've seen my videos on the Lost Medieval bow and if the longbow is overrated, I go into detail and showing evidence for that these short bows, short recurve bows, can absolutely be as high poundage as heavy longbows. It wasn't the size of the bow that determined if their poundage. Okay, there are other factors that are involved with it. So they fail in the categorization in terms of the damage, like we see in all video games regarding war bows. It's not the size, but man, I really do like the heavy animation shot. See how she leans back like that, and she's really putting weight into it. It's satisfying. I find this very satisfying watching it. It's like, oh yeah, you can feel the power. I made this point in my video about if you could shoot like an elf from a tree, that the stance conveys power, and so many video games are just missing out. I love that Elden Ring at least has one animation that shows the amount of power through stance and body language that some of these warbows could have. So there's a big win for me. And unfortunately, they just failed in the regular shooting animations, where it's just like very basic, weak, Olympic archery style, shooting, when if this is a warbow, no, that's not the stance. And she's not even drawing it to her ear or even her cheek. It's pretty pathetic. So a big win and a big fail in regards to how archery is depicted in Elden Ring. And lastly, we have crossbows. And so the design of this crossbow, perfect, beautiful, another chef's kiss. There are so many just beautifully designed, fully accurate weapons in this game. And in terms of the animation, what's interesting about the crossbow, it takes a separate kind of button, command to load it, which means it's going to be a slower weapon, just like this. And so I like that. In terms of how difficult it is to load, it's depicting it to be way easier. Like for an actual battlefield or a castle defense, a crossbow meant to be used in full-on war. The poundage that it has is huge, and the fact that she's just loading it with one hand, that is not accurate to how powerful this crossbow should be. It's either a pathetically weak crossbow to be able to load it like that, or they are not depicting the animation correctly at all. Even on two-handed one, it's basically the same animation. And so that's a big fail with the crossbow in regards to that. And it's the same with other crossbows as well, just one-handed animation and shooting. And this is the same if you two-handed as well. And so that's where crossbows kind of sit in this game. Now, crossbows are a bit hard to implement properly in video games because the reason why they were used so much in warfare wasn't because they were more powerful than bows or faster than bows to shoot. It's because they were easy to train and easy to aim with. And so maybe you could have a mechanic that crossbows were easy to aim with, but it'd be hard to implement them in the game. And one of the things that would affect crossbows' real utility and fun to play in a video game, if you had historically accurate reload times, the time it would take to reload them to get about equivalent damage that you get out of a bow, crossbows would become a very ineffective kind of fighting weapon. And I'm saying fighting instead of combat, because in warfare, because of the way warfare works, you're in a unit formation. You could employ a big pavese or pavis for, protection while you're reloading it. Crossbows absolutely were a battlefield weapon, but in terms of actual, say, fighting, one-on-one fighting an individual, a crossbow would be a terrible weapon because of its limitations and its length of reloading. You can get away with bows because bows, you can reload faster, and there are ways to, in terms of gameplay mechanics, you can roll, get distance, and shoot. And it's harder to get distance with bows in actual fighting, but a bow in fighting combat one-on-one is still a vastly more viable weapon than a crossbow. But just before I finish up on the weapons, I want to give an honourable mention to their kite shields. I already kind of did mention the kite shields, but the thing I want to mention is that I love that they gave it a center grip on the kite shield, so when you block with it, you just hold it up like that. Why am I giving it an honourable mention? This is my favourite grip position on the kite shield. It is historically accurate. In terms of handhold positions, the kite shield has the most versatile handhold positions that we see in medieval art. So there's many ways to hold a kite shield. This is just one of the ways, but it's my personal favourite way to hold a kite shield in kind of one-on-one fighting, okay, separate to other ways that they can be employed. It's very versatile. It gives you a lot of control over it, and that's the way that I made my own kite shield in terms of center grip in this exact same way that we see in Elden Ring, and so I love it. I think it's great. So there we go. As I mentioned at the very beginning, Elden Ring has done some things really, really good, better than a lot of other games. And it's not perfect, but it's certainly going in the right direction for how well it's done. Like the fact that they have a better animation for the heavy bow draw. Oh, really happy. I love that. I think it looks so good. It's just a good example of when you do things more realistically, how much better it looks and more immersive, all those things, okay? So thank you for joining me. Now, I did mention I didn't get to go to all the, weapons, like the fancy exaggerated ones and everything. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see something like that in the future. If you want to hear my thoughts on the game overall, just a general review, do check out Night's Watch. I hope to see you there, and of course, I hope to see you on the next video here on Shadowversity. So until that time, farewell.